Testing.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for all of you for making time to attend this today. I'm excited to have all of you here to hear some lessons learned from, I'll introduce here in just a minute, Chief Olson with the, managed the Eaton fire. We also have Chief Olson who managed the Palisades fire. Yes, they have the same last name and they see each other on holidays. So, but the whole idea here, it was just, and I've had the privilege of hearing this presentation a couple of times, and there's a lot of similarities on some things that could challenge us the next time we get a significant wildfire on our east end. So thought it was great to bring them. I asked them and they were more than happy to come and share their experiences and some of the things that they had to learn on the fly to manage very catastrophic and very dynamic incidents. We're going to spend a little more time on the Eaton fire only because in looking at the two, that is very similar to some of our challenges with multi-jurisdictional fires on our east end. We get a fire that impacts us with a Santa Ana wind push. Very commonly could be in Yorba Linda first or impacting Yorba Linda at the same time, the city of Orange and so forth, where on the Palisades fire, that was largely one entity. Even though there were multiple agencies involved, it was largely comprised just to Los Angeles City. So, but we do have Chief Lonnie Olson here, so he'll be providing some comments on that incident as well. So, the other thing I just want to mention real quick before I introduce Chief Olson is this is kind of special on the relationship we have with CAL FIRE. They're not going around the state, even though they're probably going to be asked several times doing this. This isn't something that isn't their full-time job, or they're not, and everybody's got lessons learned that they would love to learn from this, but when we made the ask, they stepped right up and got approvals to come here in Anaheim and share this information with us. And it's not all about the firefight, as far as they're not going to speak a whole lot about the strategy and tactics where they put fire engines and where they engage the fire. It's more a lot of it with all the other things that come into play with that. The EOC, our policy group, our other departments, how we all have a piece in that and how they had to pull all that together in probably the most challenging environment that they could have that. So without any further ado, Division Chief Dan Olson from CAL FIRE Riverside. He has 29 years of experience with CAL FIRE. He manages battalions 5 and 11 in Riverside County, with also the city of San Jacinto. He supervises the Baptista Conservation Camp, which are the hand crews, the Hemet Ryan Air Attack Base, and the Riverside County Hazardous Materials Team. So you don't have a lot of extra time. Chief Olson serves as the Deputy Incident Commander for the Riverside County Type 3 All Hazard Incident Management Team, and he also serves as the Deputy Incident Commander for CAL FIRE Team 3, which is a Type 1 incident management team that managed the Eaton fire. And I also want to introduce, I mentioned real quickly here, Chief Lonnie Olson, who's the Deputy Incident Commander. Sorry, Lonnie, I forget which team you're on, 6 or 2, I'm sorry. He's the Deputy Incident Commander on another Type 1 team for CAL FIRE. So he was on one fire, his brother was on the other. So Chief, thank you very much for being here.
Good morning, everyone. So as Chief Russell had mentioned, I'm going to give you guys some insight on this. The level that we're going to be speaking to is about complex incident management. So we're all very familiar with some of the issues that came out of both the Palisades as well as the Eaton fire. And when I say issues, more on the political standpoint that was in the media light. I'm not here to touch on those. I'm here to kind of disseminate some information pertaining to the management of complex incidents and how that would affect any city or organization. So with that, obviously I've got a mix of folks in here. So what I like to do is try and curtail the slides so that information presented to you kind of gets to where it needs to be. So with that, I know I got a whole host of uniforms in here. How many people in uniform are on incident management teams? So we got a couple. Okay, and then for my city staff, do I have my EM? There we go. PIO, I know I met Mike. And then Public Works, utilities, any of our folks there? And then city managers and city council? Perfect. So what I'll try and do is some of the takeaways and lessons learned that affected some of the adjacent cities, Arcadia, Pasadena, Sierra Madre, and then obviously the unincorporated. And I'll try and highlight some of those for you folks so that way we're all walking away with a little bit. So with that, we'll go ahead and get into this. So a little bit of background. January 7th, essentially is when the Eaton fire had kicked off. Now, as we can all recall, because it was just a couple months ago, Palisades happened first, and then the Eaton fire kicked off shortly thereafter. If you remember, that was in January. Ironically, Lonnie and I were both on a fire called the Franklin fire that occurred in Malibu in December. And so you got to look at that timeline, right? December, LA County gets hit, you know, they get punched. And then Palisades, boom, they're getting punched again. And then for the third time, the Eaton fire kicks off. So little fun brother humor that I like to tell, and Lonnie's heard this multiple times. I've been on an IMT for 10 years. Love my team. My team has been out on the Oroville dams. We did the Montecito mudslides. We did the Tulare floods, Dixie fire, which was the million-acre fire that went from the west side of the Sierras all the way to the Nevada border. And then every year, it's just been your normal wildland fire. So a lot of experience with regard to scope and scale. These particular incidents were like something we've never seen, and we're going to get into that. But back to Lonnie. Lonnie's first year on the team was this year. We did the draft, as we call it, much like those that play fantasy football. We did the draft. Lonnie gets selected to be on Team 2 as an IC trainee. He gets launched on the Palisades fire, and then you got me over here on the Eaton fire. So I call Lonnie, and I'm like, hey, man, you signed up to play a little football. You didn't know that you'd be going to the Super Bowl, your first one out. And that's essentially what happened was you had these two conjoining major incidents occurring simultaneously. So we get kicked off for this incident. And as you can kind of see up there, we'll get into the geographic area, but you guys are probably pretty familiar with the LA area or any area around here where you have a multitude of local government, state, federal. At any given time, we can be in a unified command where all agencies are representing their respective departments, and we have to come together to work together. So kicks off on the 7th, and on the 9th, we get launched. As far as I say we, CAL FIRE's Incident Management Team 3, we get tasked to go in. When we arrive, you can see there was already LA County Fire's Type 3 team. And when I say team, I got to slow down a little bit because I know everyone in uniform understands the fire service acronyms, and we love our acronyms in the fire service, and I'll start using all these acronyms, and I need to slow down. So if there's an acronym I use and you need me to expand on that, please let me know. So IMT for Incident Management Team, LA County is in place. We had a great relationship with them before, and that's why I prefaced it with, we had the Franklin fire before, and we were working with their IMT. Palisades was already working in conjunction and building those collaborative efforts. So by the time you get to the Eaton fire, sets and reps were already there with working with these folks. So they're in place. Unbeknownst to us, LA County Sheriff actually has a Type 3 Incident Management Team, which is the first I'd ever interacted with them. CWCG, or our federal partners, the California Incident Management Team 5 was also on site, and they were there before us to manage everything on the ANF, or Angeles National Forest, where the fire had affected. And then lastly, we come in as the CAL FIRE representative. So this is the breakdown in real estate as far as what that looked like. The big takeaway I want for you guys here today is recognize, does anyone know off the top of their head how many acres the Eaton fire was? 14,000 acres. Now in the scale of everything, we've seen million-acre fires, we see 100,000 acres. This is a 14,000-acre fire, which we deal with pretty regularly in California on a weekly basis in the height of fire season. The variance is where it was located, the time of year, and the scope and scale and magnitude which happened with the devastation, right? So it moved out of the essentially the Eaton Canyon, came down into the toe of the slope or the foothills, and that's where we deal with what we refer to as a WUI environment, a wildland-urban interface. That's where residents meet natural landscape. We deal with it collectively in Southern California everywhere, let alone in the state of California. You folks deal with it here, I believe, more in your Anaheim Hills area, where you have that interface, right? Where you have the residents that abut to the natural landscape, and in the Eaton fire, that was no different, San Gabriel foothills. So here's a breakdown of your dirt or your real estate. You can see that on the federal component or on the Angeles National Forest itself, just over 9,700 acres. When you deal with local, we're talking Arcadia, Pasadena, unincorporated Altadena, Sierra Madre area, 3,500 acres. The fire actually started on state land. And we contract with LA County to essentially protect those lands as if they were their own. So we pay a fee to them through a contract component, and they pay for that. So kind of your breakdown, and then obviously you can see the LRA piece as we sub-break that out as far as the number of acres for each respective city or agency there. Little breakdown on the dirt there as far as where it happened, topography. We're all familiar with Southern California as far as the fuel models. A lot of fast-moving fuels, light fuels, brush. We don't see the big canopies of essentially timber unless we get really high into the elevations. We think Big Bear, Angeles National Forest. In this model, we're dealing with the foothills. It ranged from 1,100 feet to about 5,600 feet in elevation. And then you can see the DPA as far as how that works. I wish, if you guys ever get a chance, there's a 3D model that our department just went to that's huge when anytime we do presentations to VIPs, and it allows you to manipulate the map to where you can see where it's burned, where the fire ran, and then how that essentially injected into the residential population as well. And I kept that link here. I gave it to Miss Natalie here, and if any of you guys want to get the PowerPoint later on or check it out, it's a pretty cool tool to have. So from an incident management team, our biggest job is the service and support. The cities, the local governments, the federal and state agencies, they all send us their resources, and we appreciate that. Time and time again, whether it's a USAR team, whether it's a strike team going out, they send those to those major emerging incidents, and our role and responsibility as an incident management team is the service and support of those personnel. So when you think of an ICS structure or an incident command system, we're responsible for providing logistics, handling the finance, the feeding, the operations, the planning of that incident. This was one of our biggest challenges, and where it's going to come into effect for my city partners here is how big of a task that was, and some of the challenges that we face and the lessons that we learned as a result of that. So as you guys can see, this is kind of an overview picture of the Rose Bowl. Huge UCLA fan. I've been a UCLA fan since I was a kid, so this was my mecca, essentially, to be able to go to the Rose Bowl. I got to go into the locker room. It was super exciting. And then to be there, it was pretty cool. And then to see what happened, as far as you can just see, there's 75 acres on this place. We used every ounce of it. So we established the ICP, or Incident Command Post, at the Rose Bowl. We'll get into cost apportionment a little bit later in the finance piece, but essentially Pasadena was kind enough to donate this as their contribution towards the incident. So when we start adding up for my finance people in the city, who's paying what as pertaining to the expenditures for the incident, this was a piece that Pasadena brought to the table that worked out great for us. 75 acres, I said that we utilized every ounce of that, and you can see why. When it comes to the total number of personnel that were assigned there, you can see that we're over 4,000 firefighters assigned, 700 National Guardsmen, 400 law enforcement officers, and 500 CCCs, or the California Conservation Corps. The challenge became with a logistical component is when you're an incident management team, we base the service and support on the number of people that are responding to that incident. So as an incident commander, if my operations people come to me and say, hey, I need X amount of engines or I need X amount of people, we do the head count, we estimate when they're showing up, and then now we need to go, provide a hotel or sleeping arrangements, and then a feeding component. With the feeding component, usually we need 72 hours to be able to order the food so that we can feed them. That's when we place the orders. The variance to these issues or these incidents that both Lonnie and I experienced is there were people showing up that came outside of our traditional ordering process or methodology, where people well above us were saying, no, you will take, the National Guard is showing up because of the spotlight, and they have a piece at this, and we need to get them involved. And so now you have 700 National Guardsmen that you didn't plan for 72 hours ago that you were gonna feed, that you didn't plan on housing, and now you have got all these injects, as we refer to them in the team world, that are coming at you at a rapid pace, and so you're trying to figure out, okay, how do we feed these people? How do we house these people? Catering. So I mentioned earlier, the federal teams have essentially a host of teams. Pat, how many teams? 10 teams, whereas CAL FIRE we have 6. So you have state and federal. Within those two organizations, there's variances on how we conduct business, whether it's an ordering piece that we'll get to in a minute, HIMSS versus Vipering for ordering bathrooms and showers and restrooms and logistical support piece, or in this instance, the feeding piece that we're touching on. So you see here on the third bullet point, both National Cater and CAL FIRE MKU were utilized to provide feeding. MKUs for CAL FIRE is referenced as a mobile kitchen unit. We staff those with inmates. It's essentially a giant kitchen on wheels. We bring it in and we can crank out up to about 25 to 3,000 meal a day, or support 25 to 3,000 personnel. National Caterer is just that. It's a vendor that the federal resources utilize. They come in and they do the same service and support when it comes to feeding. Since we had two different agencies, both of us ordered what we were used to. So the federal team orders the National Caterer, and we order the MKU piece. One of the challenges is we talked about that head count, right? So I'm saying, hey, I need to know how many heads. Well, in a traditional methodology, if I only have one kitchen, I tell that kitchen, hey, you're feeding 2,700 tomorrow. When I have two kitchens, it's hard to know, hey, who's serving steak and who's serving whatever else, and where are all these people gonna go to feed, because now they have options. And so it's hard to adjust your feeding numbers based on two different locations. And then we take it to a whole nother level, that challenge that we ran into. Because of the spotlight and how this was a huge, essentially topic at the time, you had people that were coming out from private resources and vendors that were wanting to assist. So on any given day, not only do I have two kitchens that I'm trying to get head counts for, but I've got Wendy's, I've got In-N-Out, I got King's Taco, and they're just rolling in with these catering trucks. And so now it turns into look like the Orange County Fair, where I've got vendors everywhere, all over the Rose Bowl. I'm trying to, my logistics guys are pulling their hair out because they're like, I don't know how much food to order. And it was a very big challenge. We appreciate, obviously, everything that they did. Yeah, the catering thing was crazy. It was crazy. Great. I never ate a sack lunch, which any of you that are on incident management teams, you live on sack lunches during the summer. I never ate a single sack lunch the entire time at the Eaton Fire because the amount of food was just epic for those caterers that were willing to come out and provide. So you can see on the bottom, just the MKU, or the mobile kitchen unit, again, served over 43,000 meals just on their site. That doesn't account for all the meals that were served to the In-N-Out and the Wendy's and all that, and then obviously the National Caterer, who provides the same sort of type of feeding service. So logistics, we're still in that realm. One of the things we talked about is ordering, and I'm gonna kind of divert this to my folks that live in the EOC world. So again, we talked about we had two major entities, technically three. The feds use what's called as Viper, and that's their program or their platform that they utilize to order and place resource orders for support stuff. So again, we talked about the catering, the bathrooms, the showers, If you guys, we get the sleeper trailers, so that way we can sleep people on the incident. That is the platform and mechanism that the feds use. It's called Viper, and then HIMSS is the hired equipment that CAL FIRE uses. One of the challenges we always have is there's some stuff on the federal side that they can't order and we can, and vice versa. What we did is we went into the EOC there for LA and got with the ordering manager, and essentially we created a force multiplier. And so we put both of our federal folks together, and we said, okay, you're gonna work out of the EOC to streamline the process, and it was a huge asset. You guys know, as far as those that work in an EOC, anytime you order something, there's a price tag that comes with it. And so now you have to have tracking and accountability for that component. And we'll get to the finance piece here, but what it worked out to be is it streamlined and tracking as far as that finance. So if the feds needed a piece for theirs, we placed it under a 30,000 block, and then we did what we call an you order, you pay. And so for a tracking mechanism, if the city of Arcata needed something, or if the city of Sierra Madre needed something, or Pasadena, it really streamlines that process. And it made it real easy where you have both ordering managers plus LA County sitting there in the command and control, and then the EOC, to everyone's on the same page as far as how that ordering piece goes, and you're not dealing with it months down the road. And that's sometimes what we see in the firefight when the smoke's in the air and people are just ordering stuff. It works great, we get it there, but it's our finance people on the back end 6, 8 months, years later going, well, who was this order for? Was it for the city of Anaheim? Was it for the city of this? Was it city? And so by having them sit essentially paired at the hip, that was a lessons learned where we went, man, this went really smooth, because when it came to the cost apportionment where the ICs sit down across the table and we bring in all those agency representatives from the other cities that were affected, really cleaned it up for us and made it really valuable. So hotels. A lot of times when we deal with fires, as Chief Russell can attest, being on a federal team, sometimes you have fires that are out in the middle of nowhere. I'm gonna use Lassen Modoc, which is in the northeast corner of the state of California. You go on a fire there, you're driving 2 hours to get to a hotel room. Obviously down here in Southern California metropolitan area, hotels aren't an issue. 60-mile radius, not an issue with hotels. What we ran into was with the 35,000 plus people that were evacuated, those people are always the priority when it comes to the team world of who needs those rooms first. So now you're not only putting up 550 rooms a night just for this incident, and remember, sphere of influence, so we're here, right in the Altadena area, and then you got Malibu, draw a 60-mile radius around them, and as far as those that are affected. And now we're trying to sleep within a reasonable accommodation. The people that are assigned to the incident are in the same hotel as those that have been affected, evacuated, or had their homes lost. And so that made for an interesting interface sometimes as far as that information dissemination. And now you have those people that are coming off the line that are just wanting to go to bed, and you have those people that have nowhere else to go, and that is their bed until they can figure out further. So the hotel piece was interesting in that regard, and we've seen that every now and then on various incidents. First time I've seen it to this magnitude where our PIOs are actually standing in the lobby of the hotels and presenting information to those same people that are staying in the same hotel as them. So one of the things we dealt with before I mentioned the Montecito mudslides, this was a learning lesson for us, was the utilization of canines. So for the canines, we found that obviously they require a special hotel because it has to be a pet-friendly hotel. With those dogs and those handlers, you can never separate them. They are tied at the hip. So it was dealing with the canine component, where we put them, how we treat them, the requirements that they needed. So we refer to them as HRD dogs, or human remain detection dogs. And those dogs have a special purpose. So we go back to that ordering piece on the top piece, trying to go, all right, usually in a wildland environment, I'm not ordering a lot of veterinarians. And so now I need a 24-hour veterinarian that's capable and available to treat all these different dogs as they're coming in and out off the line. And so again, it's those anomalies or those pieces that in a typical wildland setting, we weren't used to or having to deal with on a regular basis. And so this was a little bit, the only conventional was the unconventional, essentially, is one of the statements that we'd make on a regular basis. Lonnie, anything to add at this point? So I don't know how many of you guys saw on the news, logistics. And this is a takeaway for my EOC folks, for my emergency managers. Historically, in the past, former PIO, liaison officer, PIO, and obviously IC. On my team, we have a letter that's drafted up. And what we've seen traditionally in the past is if you have an incident, hearts and minds are wanting to assist. So the public outreach is huge. So you'll get cupcakes, you'll get water, you'll get perishable, non-perishables, and those will get dropped off. And the only place that they know is the ICP because that's what's usually seen in their local news station or radio station. So we have a letter, and this is my recommendation or takeaway for the city folks, is have a pre-template letter, and it'll assist you with this. The letter that we usually have says, we appreciate the generosity and donations that are outpouring from the residents and citizens. However, the firefighters and public safety are well taken care of at this time. We ask that you make your donations towards ... And you defer that, because this is what happened for us on the Eaton fire. We didn't get ahead of it quick enough, and I'll be the first one to admit that. And national spotlight, we all know the media market here for the LA area. By the time this thing took off, the touchdown, you can see the pictures there. The outpouring was huge. Remember, we're in an ICP in Rose Bowl. If you guys have ever been to the Rose Bowl, it's essentially limited access and egress. You were literally in a bowl. And so now I've got all these residents that their hearts are in the right place, but they're coming down and they're wanting to drop off. And it's just nonstop. And you can see it turned out to where it looked like a giant swap meet. Like there was just so much stuff. The bigger issue is I had folks coming in, we need to feed them, we need to give them a briefing, and we need to get them out on the line. And so now my traffic component, as far as my traffic coming, access and egress into that, is so cluttered because these people are again, trying to help. But my logistics section chief is now having to figure out, how do I get all this off site and how do I turn this off? Eventually, we were able to get it all moved, but now I'm taking those same folks that are supposed to be managing the base, and now they have an extra task, and that task is huge, and that's moving all this stuff. We ended up transferring this all over to the Santa Anita Race Park, but I want to share that with the city folks that have that letter ready, have it in the hopper, have it in the barrel, so that if you guys are dealing with an incident and you need to get ahead of that, defer that to your local charitable organizations. Get that monkey off your back so that way you guys don't end up in this situation. And the other thing that we always see is with those perishables on a hot August, you get all the cupcakes, you get all the, next thing you know, your camp swarmed with flies and ants. And the guys are screaming and yelling, running around everywhere. So just something to think about as far as a takeaway. Again, we've practiced it before, but it came at us at such a fast pace, it turned to this in no time flat. So we'll get into the finance piece. So a little backstory with CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE, we use what's called an 09 or 0900 emergency fund. And that emergency fund is essentially designed to support the wildland component throughout the state of California. So anytime they order a team, anytime we send strike teams, all the stuff that we order when we talked about that hired equipment list, all of that is back paid through an 09 fund. And it's a pretty robust fund because it's grown over the years because obviously the devastation and the size of the fires that we've had throughout the state, especially in the last 15, 20 years. There's some sideboards with that, and that 0900 fund is designed specifically for wildland. So much like procurement rules that exist throughout the city portions as well as any other agency, there's limitations on what you can spend that on. And one of the challenges that we had was meeting the intent of what that 09 funding is. And when I say that, it's hard to justify on a wildland incident why you're buying canine booties for the dogs. And so we got to the point where my finance section guy comes into my trailer, to the IC trailer, and he's like, I'm not going to jail for this. Like he's, if anyone understands the financial rules and regulations of the state of California, it's my finance guy. He's there to keep me out of trouble. So when your finance guy shows up and kicks the door open and says, I'm not going to jail for it, he's freaking out, then kind of puts some hair on the back. So we had to go outside the realm and essentially get a letter all the way up from Sacramento. Essentially, it's that get out of jail free card. And because we're being told, again, remember, Some of this stuff's coming in well above us and saying, hey, you will implement this, you will make this happen. So we needed that letter so that we can attach to every invoice for every purchase, for every procurement that shows up and saying, we were told that we are to service and support and provide this entity, and so we need that letter. And so that's where it became a little bit tricky for us, is making sure that all those I's and T's were crossed. Same thing with the city piece, as far as there's always a component where in a traditional environment, there may be something that may be easier on the EOC to acquire, and it'll fall within your rules or regulations for procurement, where it may not be so applicable. In my instance, wearing the state patch, it may not fall under there. So I'll give you a perfect example of that. We talked about the Tulare floods. There's some stuff where the cities have the ability to procure items, whereas maybe we don't. So SAR masks, right? So dust masks. Traditionally not something that's used in the wildland environment. However, the city's probably a little less restricted on their capabilities of those types of order. So when the city, where was my EM? So when the EMs need to order that product, that deliverable, they'll have the ability to order it, and then we track that on the finance piece later on down the road, saying, okay, this was from the city of Anaheim. And so that way, when my finance guy is tracking all that, we can identify, okay, Anaheim paid for this and we paid for that. Makes it a little bit easier. So due to the multi-jurisdictional nature, we kind of said you order, you pay. Meaning if the feds needed something up on the hill for the suppression component, they ordered it. CAL FIRE took the lead for everything that had to do with the USAR piece, and we'll kind of get into that in the operations, as far as they went high, we went low, and how we dove that out. Cost estimate for the Eaton fire, essentially 33.7. That only captures the CAL FIRE resources and request numbers. And again, you see it says that 2,000 block. So another piece for my city personnel is, if you pre-establish those ordering blocks, it's real easy to track. City of Anaheim paid for this, City of Orange, City of whatever. Essentially, it cleans it up on the back end for when you're dealing with those major incidents. By everything that one organization orders is in the 20,000 block, next organization's in the 30. And then if you have a cost pool where you all agree, hey, this is just going in to where everyone's gonna have a piece of this pie, then you identify 60,000 block, that goes into the general pool or general fund, and then we all split that up at the end. But for the order you order, you pay, the best means is that blocking out of those numbers. Does that make sense to anyone? Does anyone have any follow-up questions while I'm on that? Just want to make sure I'm not losing you guys here. Liaisons. My IMT guys, do I have any liaisons in the room? No? All right. Huge piece for us. Again, we talked about, you think about your infrastructure. My public works, correct? Utilities. So you take an area, right, all along that foothills, and you got to think about all your infrastructure, your public works, your utilities, your electric. That's where the liaison officers are essentially the conduit for the team to be able to communicate any issues or concerns or questions that those entities have, and then they bring them back to the team for us to resolve. So at the height, we were about 11, we refer to them as loafers. So if you hear me say loafers, it's a liaison officer, and 5 LELOs. I know I got a couple LE guys in here, and I'm gonna make a shameless plug at you two right now. We are so short on LELOs, and that law enforcement liaison officer on the incident management team, he's our translator. They speak COP, and they learn to speak fire. And where that comes into play for our city organizations or our IMTs is when you have an emerging incident within your city, you need someone that has the ability to translate both languages. And while it sounds minute, to be able to issue TCPs, traffic control points, to be able to identify, Chief, are you guys on Genesis Protect, or what do you guys use here for your evacuation component? Where's my EMs? Unknown? Okay. So, I'm sorry? Nothing? To be able to identify what zones we're evacuating, how to work with the teams to get those trigger points or those management action points where we say, hey, when the fire gets to here on the hill, we need to evacuate this area here, here, and here. To get the sets and reps as a law enforcement liaison officer or an LE, and then you bring all that training, education, and experience back to your city is huge. And what we've just seen over the last year or so is that we are losing our guys because they've been in the game so long, they're either retiring or they've promoted up. So real quick, shameless plug, could use all the law enforcement guys because it's a force multiplier. We get to use you, and then when something breaks out in the city, you guys have that knowledge experience to be able to benefit the city in that capacity as well. So we embedded one law enforcement liaison is for our team. And when I say our team, into the EOC. That person usually works as a speaking component for us. They provide the information to the EOC folks that are filling those other roles, right? So just like we have an incident commander, a liaison, a finance, operations folks, we know that when we activate that EOC component, there's roles and responsibilities that are filled in that position as well. Our liaison officer is that conduit to that EOC. And then the other thing that we do, Mike, for PIO, do you guys have a standard practice for like a JIC or a Joint Information Center in the event that something happened to take in those calls?
We do.
Okay.
And we would be
Okay, perfect. Surprisingly enough, and you guys are well ahead of the curve. When we travel all over, and sometimes we deal with organizations or local government, there's a lot of folks that don't have that in place or don't identify, hey, we know what it is, but when you need to hit that button for that JIC activation, what groups do we use, right? And so that's another lesson learned is predetermining those groups. Hey, do we have a, an Elks group or the women's group or something to where they can staff that, because when you're hitting the button, an emergency breaks out, you need those folks to come in because those folks fill that information dissemination piece, and that takes that burden off of your 911 system. It takes it out of your dispatch's hands. It takes it out of the LE's hands to where they're having to answer those routine questions of, hey, is the fire near my house? How many acres is it? What's the containment size? That all gets off of the backs of your dispatchers and your 911 system, and then we funnel them to that joint information system, our center that's usually established within your EOC. So glad to hear you guys have something like that. The other thing that we recognize is because of scope and skill for this thing, we established a VIP task force. First time we'd ever done that, where we essentially identified amongst the ICs and a contingent of folks, we were getting hit so much with the celebrity visits, the VIP visits, the congressional, the assemblies, you name it. If it was a political figure and they wanted to come visit, we had to stop whatever it was we were doing and be able to provide them with that information and that tour. So what we did is we built a group and we said, okay, it's gonna be one of us as the ICs, and then we're gonna take the loafers, a couple loafers, and then a PIO, and then an ops section chief. And that was the traveling roadshow. And that was their sole responsibility in this whole incident, was to be, because the demand was so great, that we were able to take that contingent of folks and say, your sole premise is, this is your lineup today. Your batting lineup consists of a congressman, an assemblyman, Fergie, and Prince Henry. That's all you're doing today. And so it came to a point where we set up a room at the Rose Bowl, and we would give them an intel brief. Hey, acreage, containment, size, this is where we're at, this is where the fire's at, these are the latest numbers for our damage assessment. And we'd give them that brief, and then we'd load them in a car, and we'd take them for kind of like the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland, right? You take them for the tour, and then you show them, obviously, the devastation and destruction, and then that's where it kind of hits home with them. And then it was rinse and repeat, because the next group would come in, and the next group would come in. And it's a vital component to be able to tell the narrative or the story of how devastating this fire was. So that was their sole responsibility. They coordinated with 61 VIP briefings and tours, and community coordinated with 230 individuals from 86 cooperating organizations. I want to pause there for a minute because I'm going to get back to my EOC piece. One of the things that we see on major incidents from the civilian standpoint, or the civilian workforce, we collectively, and when I say we, the fire service are used to working in a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operation. And when stuff starts getting really bad, we know days off canceled, we're all used to that. We put on, as my brother likes to say, we said yes to the dress, right? So the challenge becomes is when you're dealing with a civilian organization and something hits. Because we do what are called cooperator meetings, and that's where every representative from every private, local agency, Edison, SoCal Gas, EOCs, city contracts, Those representatives are supposed to be there. And we share and disseminate intel. The variance between intel and information is information's for public dissemination. But if my utilities guy comes to me and says, hey, I'm having a real big issue, my utilities aren't going to be up for X amount of days, you don't necessarily want that for public digestion because you might get some heat on the backside about how long that's going to take. But if you're not there to have that conversation with us so that we can plan and start planning on how we're going to walk back the repopulation piece, then that's information that we need and we don't get. And so where I'm going with this is Monday through Thursday, we have a huge showing. Anyone want to guess what happens on Friday, Saturday, Sunday? I was just talking to Chief Russell about this. I was on the Oroville Dam, and we're sitting there and we're in a cooperators meeting, and I've got all the hydrologists. Firemen know nothing about hydrology other than we set it to 150 PSI and we pump that hose and then we're good to go, right? But when you're dealing with dam failing and all that, guys have propellers, right? And so these are the individuals or the SMEs, the subject matter experts that we are relying heavily on. But they weren't in that environment to where, hey, it's a 3-day weekend, so I'll see you guys on Tuesday. And it's like, whoa, time out. That's not how this is gonna work. So my messaging to you folks as far as a city organization is just make sure that we're at that meeting. If there's a plot during the day when you guys are dealing with a major incident, that 10 a.m. to noon is huge for you. So book that time frame out because the 10 a.m. is the cooperators meeting regardless of what team you're on, whether it's federal, whether it's state. 10 a.m. is usually where we get all those cooperating agencies together and we share that information. What are your issues? What are your concerns? And how can we help you? And then the follow-up to that is we do badges meeting with our local law enforcement and we discuss the evac and repopulation coordination. And then that 10 to 12 is vital. So my ask moving forward, just make sure you have representation because we even felt this on this incident. And when you have all those different entities, again, Sierra Madre, Arcadia, Pasadena, LA County, you need all those players in the room so that we can make a collective decision on behalf of the entire incident. As opposed to if it's just Pasadena, then obviously the focus is going to be Pasadena or Arcadia. So for a utility piece, just something to consider. LELOs, we talked about the remanagement or the repopulation of over 35,000 people. One of the challenges that we got hit with Chief O'Brien, who one of the chiefs for LA County Fire, is they had a little bit of a looming effect from, if you guys remember, the Woolsey fire. There was a little bit of a delay what they dealt with in the repopulation component. And they felt that from a backlash on the media piece as well as obviously the public piece. And so we didn't want to repeat history with that, and he was very cognizant of that, and that was one of the challenges he gave us was we need to get people back like as soon as we can. And that we always strive to do that, but there's always some challenges when we're dealing with outside entities that are beyond our control, right? So if we're like, hey, we're ready to repopulate, and a public utilities company says, no, we still have lines down, or we haven't been able to secure the infrastructure for there yet, so we can't let people back in. It's usually these faces, right, that we're the patch that are taking the brunt of the heat from the public, and like, why aren't you guys putting us back in our homes? So we had to come up with a plan, and that's the piece I want to share with my fire partners in here, should you come across this. That was very successful for us. Public information. So real quick, guy on the left in the yellow Normex, his name's Sean Norman. He was our ops section team for Team 3 for years. Just retired last year. This guy is a black cloud. Amongst all those other incidents I told you he went with us on, Sean was one of the first chief officers on for the campfire that happened in Paradise. So you take the campfire and the Paradise and the lessons learned, and then now I got Sean Norman at the Eaton fire. We call him a black cloud, but the knowledge, experience that guy brought to the Eaton fire was huge because they did similar with the USAR, the urban search and rescue piece, destruction, doing assessment on homes, doing searches on homes. He brought that piece. Greg Short, anyone familiar with him from LA County? Oversees the entire USAR program. That guy was supposed to be in Dubai the week that this kicked off, teaching urban search and rescue. So I've got an SME in search and rescue from a national level, and then I've got Sean Norman. And to put those two guys together, we were able to come up with a plan that was huge. Back to public information, I'm gonna get in Mike's wheelhouse here a little bit. So they were tasked with providing coordinating message to the public, elected officials, cooperators, and stakeholders. You can see there, the one thing that we had to do that was interesting, and we never had to deal with this before, is the messaging that we sent out for the Eaton fire. We had to coordinate and collaborate with my brother on the Palisades fire because we didn't want it to look like one area was getting special treatment because of where they were geographically versus another area that wasn't maybe in the same high influential geographic area. If that makes sense to everyone. So we don't want to, you want to make sure that, hey, if they're getting it over here, we're providing that same service over here. And so we tried to constantly coordinate, hey, what are you guys doing for public meetings? Are you guys doing virtual? Are you doing in person? Or are you doing both? What's your demand? And then coordinating on the public information side, your board of supervisors are going to want to be at both, right? So now I got to come up to him and say, okay, you're going to do your public information meetings on the odd days. I'm going to do mine on the even, because if we're both trying to knock out at 1800 or 6 p.m. public information meeting, that's not going to work, right? So coordinating, if there's multiple entities, agencies, or incidents occurring that need to be at both, coordinating that piece with your partners to make sure that, hey, let's identify those timeframes. We talked about the VIP task force that's up there. We talked about intercepting celebrity visits. This was big. At any given time, again, hearts and minds, they want to be in the right place, they want to assist, but you want to put a stop to an incident command post as far as work production. You bring Fergie or Angelina Jolie into the work, and I used this one before. It's like if you guys have kids in Despicable Me where the minions just go running, like you put Angelina Jolie next to the feeding at the MKU and work stops. And everyone's getting a pic. Great for me, I would walk right up to the food line, that line would disappear, and I'd grab my food and go back to the trailer, and I'm like, cool, I got stuff to do. But it was amazing how many of these folks would just come out, and again, their heart's in the right place, but now they want a tour. And it wasn't one of the tours that was on your VIP batting lineup earlier in the day of like, hey, you got a congressman? Nope, all of a sudden Prince Henry shows up and you're like, okay, here we go. So created a little bit of a challenge, but it's a challenge that we were able to overcome. And for my football people, it was in Omaha, right? Omaha at the line, we got to change the game plan. 1.2 million views on social media platforms. So another PIO realm is making sure that we have the people that are able to stay on top of that. We bring some of that service and support with our PIO or public information, but we rely heavily on the assistance of the local agencies, the local cities to be able to man that. And the way that that functions, and the only way that it can function for success, is there's a saying that says, same message, same time. And this is where it gets people in a train wreck, whether you're a city government agency or a fire department or whatever the case may be. If you guys are, if everyone does not get on board for the same message, same time, it creates huge issue. And I'm going to use an example. Something significant happens on an incident. We have those meetings that we just talked about, the 10 o'clock cooperators, and then we go into the badges meeting where it's cops and firemen figuring stuff out. One of the challenges is if you have something that needs to be announced and we need to get, let's say there was a firefighter injury. And now it was to the city of Anaheim's firefighter, hypothetical. And now we need to get all those entities in line so that way, if the city of Anaheim is taking lead, as they should, Chief Russell, right, is going to make that announcement. But all of a sudden, if another entity makes that announcement prior to, or CAL FIRE pushes a fact sheet, which we push 2 fact sheets on an incident in the morning and the afternoon. Chief Russell's planning on making that announcement at 9 o'clock that, hey, we had this serious injury that occurred, but that communication between our public information folks hasn't occurred, and we push that out at 7 o'clock. We kind of went over our skis a little bit, right? That's Chief Russell's job. And so where it becomes vital is coordinating and collaboration amongst the information so that dissemination of the same message at the same time. And we deal with that on a regular basis. Especially gets tricky for my law enforcement partners when you start talking about deaths that occurred on an incident. It's a fire incident. That's your guys' wheel shop, right? There's notifications that have to be made to the family. You're dealing with the medical examiner, the ortho. So there's a lot of steps in there that's really outside of the fire lane. Even though it happened on a fire related incident, That's an LE piece. You're dealing with coroners and family notification. So, and when I reference that for the civilian side, obviously not if it was a fire-related individual. So the takeaway for that is same message, same time, whether it's the PIO for their LE, the city, the team. That is huge because that's where we end up with a lot of train wrecks is something leaks out or something gets ahead and those cooperators and stakeholders aren't all on the same page. And that is a vital piece because if that timing piece works, it clicks and it's great. You get one person that's out ahead, it creates a lot of backlash for the other people. So, 1.2, social media, 2,763 in media interviews. You can see there Sean Norman's being interviewed by Anderson Cooper. He was over ecstatic, big Anderson Cooper fan, so he was super excited. He lives in Grass Valley. Not a lot of media presence if you've ever been to Grass Valley, so he was down here, he was eating it up. 10,000 public contacts to provide updates. This is where we send those troops, those information officers out in the field, and we say, go forth and conquer. And so usually it takes a big contingent of those people to do that in person. It's that shaking of the hand, looking someone in the eye and saying, hey, how are you doing? What can we do for you? That is a vital piece, regardless of what agency you work for, what local government, to have those folks in the field, to be able to stand in front of the Walmarts or to stand at those major points of congregation, to be able to address your residents and say, hey, how are you doing? Do you need an update? Where do you live? Let me see how I can apply and help you. And that interface is huge. What we have a tendency to see is when we're in these large media markets, we all fall back to social media because it's the greatest outreach. When you go to, again, we'll use Lassen Modoc, more of a rural area, that form of communication is grandma and grandpa may not be savvy in the internet world, right? Or on the social media platforms. So we are heavily, as a team, dependent on those interactions and interface through the face. 5 minutes of your time in a handshake, I don't care where you're at, it still goes a long way in today's society. And that was the piece here for LA County. We were able to put those folks, and I know Palisades did the same thing, where they were able to string people out, and that's their job, is to be able to talk with the public. And it presents public face for the cities, the agencies, the departments, and the patch. So operations. So we talked about division of labor. When we met with our federal counterparts, you can see all the green up there, that is Forest Service land. And then obviously as we get to the toe of the slope here on the map, that's that wildland urban interface where natural landscape starts to meet in with the residents in the populated area. So what we said is feds go high, we go low. Feds meaning they're gonna deal with the fire suppression and the wildland aspect, and then we coordinated for the urban search and rescue, the recovery, and the DINs. For my folks, DINs is the damage inspection teams that we use to assess the damage that's occurred to structures. And we'll get into the structure piece here in a minute, but essentially we were tasked with that, and then the evac and repopulation of those residents that were affected in those city contracts that we identified, as well as the unincorporated area of Altadena. So we facilitated all of that, and we had to come up with a plan. How do we eat this elephant, right? 10,000 plus homes, damage destroyed. What is the systematic order in which we're gonna do this? So we all saw the picture on the right. News camera goes overhead, and you just see blocks and blocks and neighborhoods of houses destroyed. The first night we met in Rose Bowl, we were meeting with one of the representatives from the LA County Sheriff's Office. And again, Sheriff's double-headed monster. They're dealing with Palisades, they got this. So they've had their hands full for the last 3 months, Franklin, Palisades, Eaton. So these guys they're on their wits' end. My guys, Sean Norman and company, and the operations section team come up with a plan. Hey, we're gonna do this, this, and this, and this is how we're gonna do it. And we are gonna complete 85% of the searches within 7 days of those 10,000 plus homes. And the quote you see up there in the top left was from the sheriff guy that I was dealing with, ranking officer, and he says, you're over-promising and going to under-deliver. And he was scared about what that would look like in the optics of the public as far as us saying, hey, we're gonna knock this out of the park and we're gonna do it for you. And he had an issue with that. That was compiled of months of stress and his current situation. These guys were all crammed in a single trailer Sheriffs didn't have the logistical support they needed to be able to operate in the capacity that they were. They had 20, 30 guys shoved in a 32-foot trailer. They were busting at the seams, and he was at his wit's end. And this is where that coordination and being a good partner comes into play. Recognizing that, we were getting trailers just showing up through our ordering process. And I went to him and said, hey, how about we give you a trailer? Let's low-hanging fruit, right? Let's take this off of your back. We're gonna be good partners. I'm gonna pay for it at a CAL FIRE because it's all gonna go into this incident. But if that helps you with the evac piece and getting your peace of mind and resetting, it was a huge benefit. And the guy still talks about it to this day, about how we were generous and gave him this trailer and it helped him out. Then he started asking for TVs and this and that, and I'm like, hey man, I give you the house, you have to decorate it, right? So, but it was a huge asset to be able to provide him, and it brought that stress level down. The beauty of it is we said 85% in 7 days. My guys knocked 100% out of it, of those homes done in 5. And so we hung our hat and we said, what we're doing here works. And that's why I think some of the piece from the fire side, talking to my fire partners, is from an operations piece. Some of the stuff that we did for the first time was on this incident, and it was a huge success, and that's why we're kind of sharing it with our folks. Our other teams are already looking at it going, hey, we got to implement this, and it has to do with where certain sections live. So I'm going to get real fire geeky I apologize for those not in the fire world real quick, but this is how we break down our ICS structure. So you have operations. They oversee the roles and responsibility of what's occurring on the fire line, and then we broke down the toe of the slope. Essentially, these are your areas. We broke these down into branches. So we broke down a 20 branch, a 30 branch, and a 40 branch, and it's just our tracking mechanism in the fire world of saying you're assigned in branch 20 on this street, and that way we can kind of track resources. So going back to here, we multitude of rescue groups under each branch, and then we had a law enforcement branch that had to deal with our anthropologists, our investigators, and then our medical examiners. So the challenge was you had 2 major incidents that occurred. You had a wildland component, right, that we talked about, but then you had essentially what would be equivalent to any other type of major disaster. You had a bunch of affected homes, 10,000 some and change. So now you have 2 major incidents that are overlapping. And it was, how do we tackle this piece? And so we bring in the USAR piece to try and manage the entire operation, and we kind of went unconventional as far as how we did that. And I'm going to show you guys as far as the analogy that we used for how we got everyone through that door in a systematic process there. We established an infrastructure branch, which was huge. And when I say infrastructure, that was an ops guy that essentially is embedded in our operations section so can talk to the folks, but he's also that person that has that line of communication with SoCal Edison, SoCal Gas, getting those updates of, hey, where are you at in section 1, which is Sierra Madre? Where are you at in Eaton? So that way we can start forecasting for how quickly can we repopulate this area. Because at the end of the day, when the fire's burning, your residents want to know acreage and containment. Where are we at on containment? How big is the fire, and where's it at close to my house? What's the one thing that they want to know as soon as smoke clears out of the air? It's repopulation. They want to get home, right? And so you have to build this on the front end, and that's why you see these geographic areas that we broke out, because you evac them, but then you also got to consider in a couple chess moves ahead, when the fire stops burning, what can we do, or how much work is it going to take to get section 1, which is Sierra Madre, back in their homes? And so we'll go over that a little bit as far as that systematic order and what that entails. Actually, let's do it right now. So working from right to left, you have Sierra Madre, Arcadia, Pasadena, and then obviously the bigger piece was Altadena. When you're in unified command with other agencies, other city governments, you're in a unified command structure where everyone has a seat at the table for a decision-making process. What that also means is when you come to the table as a unified commander representing your city or your agency, you're also bringing a checkbook, okay? And that's where we kind of talked about the Pasadena piece where their contribution was the Rose Bowl, cover some of that. So you look at a department like Sierra Madre Fire Department, one station. They had a couple dozen, I believe, homes. We'd have to go back in the slide for terms of damaged and destroyed. But on scope and scale of this entire incident, the impact, they were the least impacted, I guess would be the best way to say that. So we started coming up with a plan and process as far as, let's get Sierra Madre handled. It's twofold. We get the inspections done, the damage inspections completed. We get the infrastructure back in place, and we get people back into their homes. And as soon as we accomplish all of that, they fall out of unified command, which means they're not on the hook for the long-term haul when it comes to the financial responsibility piece. And now we're minimizing the number of decision makers that are in that room. Does that make sense to everyone? So we started, how do we eat this elephant? So then we get Sierra Madre, boom, we knock them, we get them handled, and then we move on to the next agency, Arcadia. A little bit more, but we knock those down, we get those players in place, we deal with the infrastructure piece, we deal with the fire suppression component, and the building and safety piece. Then we keep moving to Pasadena, and then ultimately we know the largest chunk of this is going to be in the Altadena piece. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but one of the things I want to share, building and safety, do I have any building and safety folks in here? Unprecedented what we did on this one that we've never done before. And that was, we knew we had so many homes. And building, I want to say LA County Building and Safety had 18 folks for 10,000 homes that needed to be red tagged. Actually, it was greater than 10,000. So what we did, lessons learned, is we baptized a bunch of firemen. And we gave them the basics of how to do building and safety red card. And so for some of our folks, they're familiar with that process depending on what organization you work at. Some chief officers, some captains have the ability, they carry the red cards in their clipboards and they have the ability to deem, hey, it's greater than 40% damaged or destroyed, so we can red tag this, and then your folks usually follow up. And I say you as far as the building safety folks, right? So what we did is we had LA County's building and safety come out and they gave a class. Morning, we do the operations briefing, and then at this point, the smoke's cleared, the embers are put out, and now we got a host of resources. And so we were able to take strike teams and strike teams and strike teams of folks and give them red cards and say, all right, here's your marching orders or your ROE. These are your rules of engagement. And we were able to conduct all those red tags of all those homes damaged or destroyed in a single operating period, which means in 24 hours we had that entire over 10,000 homes red tagged if they deemed necessary. Unprecedented. It was huge. It was great. And again, remember what the finish line is. That's one of the steps that we need in order to get folks back in their homes, is we need to be evaluating what homes we can put them back into and what homes we can't. So I talked about the door. This is a simple analogy that I use. You have a door in a hallway and you've got hundreds of people that need to get through that door, which is the fire line. And so you see there's a list on the left-hand side. I need to get the urban search and rescue teams through. They need to be conducting their search, as well as the SAR teams from the law enforcement side. You have the LE representatives. You have the canine human remains detection dogs. I need to get through that door. You've got the anthropologists, the medical examiners, the suppression personnel, the environmental health. You got public works, our damage inspection teams that need to go in there and assess the extent of damage, your utility companies, and lastly, your residents. Residents being the last one, I need to get all of those other people through that single door. And so how do we do that? How do we build that systematic organization to get them through? So here's what we did. And this is the piece for any of my USAR guys, or if you guys deal with this in the city, a takeaway as far as organizing. Doesn't have to be on the wildland piece, right? You have a plane come into a neighborhood. You have an emerging incident, a hazmat, whatever the case may be. How do we organize that to be able to essentially mitigate the incident and then get people back in their homes? So ROE, you'll hear me reference that. Rule of engagement was once anything was located, and when we say anything, we're referencing human remains at this point in this PowerPoint. We'd do further inspection, and the search team would back out. So we had a host of search USAR teams throughout the country that came. You can see San Diego's represented there on the left. They were given a geographic area they would search, so if they came across something, they would back out and contact the LE. We'd have an LE representative assigned to each team. Deputy would take control of the scene, and direct further inspection to include the use of the K9 HRD or debris removal. If the fire is still under investigation, until we've determined cause, what's the potential for that fire, for this to be, for each house? Could be a crime scene, okay? So that's something to consider is you have 10,000 homes, we're having to search them all. Until we've determined what caused the Eaton fire, we treat everything as a crime scene. So that's why we had such a heavy LE presence with every USAR piece, and we had to get them assigned, so that way the minute that something came across, we were able to shut it down and turn it over to LE for that criminal potential. So it'd be required further inspection. We'd get a hold of the anthropologist was contacted, and a deputy would use the LE camera to send a photo to the anthro or the anthropologist. If the anthropologist determined a high degree of suspicion that the item was potentially human, the homicide unit would be contacted and arrived and could take control of the scene. The medical examiner, ME's office, and anthro would direct any additional work on site, and then they would follow their established procedures. And then the sheriff's department was embedded, like we said, at every level. And then we kind of go into some nuances there as far as how we work that with the branch and the group level supervision, and where we embedded those deputies. So, real quick pause, that picture on the left. So we're seeing this more and more, and it's not just LA, it's everywhere throughout California is essentially where we're intruding in on the natural landscape. I know right now amongst all our cities, I know in my city that I chief for, we're dealing with the fire hazard severity zone mapping, right? It's a big point of contention. And this is a picture that I've used for my city council as well, just kind of demonstrating that. But we're not gonna chase that rabbit, we'll get back on task here. So they define the search priorities in each zone, and the priorities were communicated through the ICS organization. And we use a program called SARCOP. Anyone familiar with that? So it's a tracking program to where we essentially can show where our USAR teams went. There it is right there. So we can identify where our USAR teams went. So one, we're capturing every house. And two, we don't have a duplication of efforts, right? Wasted time and energy and effort. So we use a program that essentially captured. And we utilized what was called a situation unit leader to run that program. So if I've got branch 20 and I've got 3 USAR teams, I have a situation unit leader that's tracking every movement of that USAR team and documenting and accounting for each house that was searched. So that's how we were so efficient. A lot of times, you might have a duplication of effort, or you have the potential to miss a residence or house. And that's how do you walk that one back, right? 6 months later, if there's something that's bad there, this program was, the way that we did this was extremely efficient and without fail. As you can see, resulted in a high degree of certainty with no location within the perimeter that went unsearched. Every evening, that situation unit leader that oversaw those USAR teams would come in and download with the team managers and group supervisors to validate the progress. So I get my USAR team through the door. Now we're starting to deal with DINs, and the damage inspection teams need to come through. Oh gosh, where'd Natalie go? You might need to get back on that slide, Miss Natalie. How familiar are you folks, real quick, I'm gonna take a pause on the DINs piece, damage inspection. Have you guys dealt with that? Where you have structures damaged, be it from a major incident, and then you have essentially, for insurance purposes, there needs to be an inspection that's done on that dwelling or residence. Done before? What we see is a lot of times it's our city governments or our council members or our board of supervisors that need that information, okay? Public's demanding, they want to know, hey, is my house affected, is it not affected? So the way that DINs or damage inspection process works in this type of arena environment is for CAL FIRE, available on any major incidents, we have our aerial intel ships, and we call them ASA. It's our aerial surveillance that is able to fly over huge elevations and get a quick windshield survey from 10, 12,000 feet in the air, and they can say, okay, out of the number of homes here, X amount were affected. The challenge is with that is that it doesn't identify every single residence as a residence. So it might ping an outbuilding. it might ping a motorhome or a vehicle, depending on if there's a canopy or whatever might throw off that data or intel. And so we need to ground truth that, right? We get a general swag of what that number is, but then we need to put the troops on the ground, send them through that door, and then do that ground truthing and figure out that number. So that was always the challenge, is figuring out how do we organize these folks and where do they fit in going through that door, and where do they live in our organizational structure as far as who manages them. When I talked about unprecedented, for the first time, our team took them and then we put them in the ops section piece. Traditionally, they go to the liaison officers because they report to our city folks for that deliverable, that data, that information, right? Today, we're 30% completed on our damage inspections, and we're at 6,232 or whatever the case may be. This time, we put them under our operations section, so they fell in that line and they were able to expedite. The communication piece with the operations was huge because the ops could tell them, hey, you can't go work in this area because Edison's gonna have a line down on the road, or they're still working on this, or public transit's working on this roadway. So the communication was shortened up and it made it really efficient. So quick down and dirty on the operations piece, this is how it worked. We'd get a missing person reported, filed with our LE folks. They'd vet the process. We'd be given an address of where they lived. Hey, my aunt, my uncle, my grandma, we haven't talked to them in 5 days. We'd send a USAR team out there to search via an encrypted telegram program, much like a WhatsApp or where that communication piece went. USAR would create a target on a waypoint. We talked about SARCOP. They would get to, that team would be notified with the deputy of the location. The team would go out and they would conduct that search. If HR or human remains were found, essentially we would go into that process on the algorithm on the left, confirmed by anthro, medical practitioner team, and USAR team situation unit is notified, and then the remains are removed by the ME or medical examiner. If it wasn't, no HR found, the medical practitioner team and USAR SIT are notified, and then we mark a cleared on that map. So we talked about the efficiency of making sure no stone unturned. We do not want to put ourselves in a position, or our city governments or our agencies, where we're missing a step and something's found later on. So this program worked very efficiently for us. And here's kind of an example. You can see the breadcrumbs as the teams are working through. They're moving. And then the DINS piece as well, very similar process. They take a picture of the structure, capture that information, and now it's twofold. Our USAR team goes through. They're doing the search. We do the HRD for the dogs. They do their search. And now our DINS is capturing that data for our information. And a lot of times what we do for our city government agencies, and that pops up in our EOCs, is we create a dashboard. And so that dashboard is live. So every time those damage inspection teams come back in, they do that download, and there's a dashboard that lives in the EOC, twofold, for our electeds, for our government personnel, and for our JIC folks. And so that way you have that latest information of, hey, we are at 65% complete, and this is how much we've completed. And so you can kind of track that as the incident progresses and we start winding down. We get on what's called a glide path, where we're descaling the incident, and you can see as those numbers, as that containment increases, as that percent of damage inspection completions, we're getting closer to the finish line. EOC piece, real quick before I forget. I'm going to tag Lonnie on this real quick, tag him in, because it's something that they dealt with on the Palisades, and I think it's huge for our EOC folks to know with regard to, do you guys have any Amazon distribution centers nearby? Perfect.
So as he said, we went through multiple incidents. One of the partnerships that we built over last year, and we used it for the first time on the mountain fire in Ventura, is Amazon has a charitable system that they will give out to any 501(c). So when you start to have major damage and destruction and you start looking at the recovery piece and the tools that are needed for that, like sifters and buckets and the items that somebody would need to go back through their damaged property and perform the recovery piece of that, we'll set up tents and stuff at the entry points that we're allowing people back into their houses. Amazon has pre-packaged on pallets that they will give away as long as you have 501(c). So very big for the EOCs. And this is a tool that you guys can tap into that we'll make the connections with. And if you guys need that information and those contacts, we can get them to you. So whenever you do have that disaster, you're prepared. You reach out to Amazon. You have to have a 501(c), which I'm sure you guys have some kind of contact with a VOAT or something that meets that. They make the request, and Amazon will actually deliver these packets for people going back through their damaged properties.
So yeah, it's essentially it's palletized huge caches of stuff for post-emergency disaster. So that way when you get your volunteers lined up, your CERT folks, whatever the case may be, you get these caches drop shipped, pick your drop point, boom, they show up, and now they've got all the tools to assist the cities and in the affected areas. So just again, lessons learned. I thought that was pretty cool, and we've been trying to share that because there's been a lot of folks that we've discussed with our city cooperators that weren't familiar with that, and it's right down the street from them, right? So. All right, so we're getting to the end, folks. So what we faced, so we talked about those numbers. Total structure undamaged was 7,890. When we do damage inspection, we also have to inspect and ensure that the undamaged and get that number as well. Within the fire footprint for CAL FIRE, anytime we do a damage inspection, both damaged and undamaged, we have to account for those structures within 300 feet of the fire's perimeter. Total structures damaged, 1,073. Total structures destroyed, 9,418. And then recognize that too often times when we're delivering that messaging, be it from our PIOs or your ICs, a lot of times we have to break that down to the public, because when we say structures, our minds instantly go to a residential structure, right? Single family dwelling. And that's not the case, because as you can see, there's a breakdown in that light on them. We have single family residence was actually 6,000, but then we also identify mixed commercial residential, so any type of commercial occupation or occupancy. Your minor structures, outbuildings, buildings like that, and then your non-residential commercial. So kind of a breakdown of the numbers there. You heard me emphasize in the beginning, this fire was only 14,021 acres to be exact. This is the list of the top most destructive fires in California's history. And if you look, there's a common thread with the dates. And unfortunately, the majority of those have happened in the last 5 to 8 years. So you can kind of see where we're going. And it's why I think we're here and we're giving the messaging as far as the successes and challenges that we had on an incident. Even though it was only 14,000 acres, the amount of devastation and destruction that occurred, there's a good chance we're going to see it again, right? If you're looking at the #1 fire, that's 2018, that's Camp Fire. 18,000 structures destroyed, 85 lost their lives, as far as the civilian component. For the Eaton fire, 17 lives lost, 14,000 acres. Palisades, 23,000 acres, 6,800 structures destroyed, and 12 deaths. So just something to consider. You can kind of see where we're moving. When I first joined the team 10 years ago, they're like, oh yeah, you go out for a week or two, it's like 10,000 acres, and then you're back home. And then 2017, 2018 hit, and I'm like, yeah, you guys sold me a bill of goods. I haven't seen my family from June to January. I counted last year, I spent 176 days in hotels on the road. So this is kind of where we're going, and this is why we're delivering the message. So that way, we're helping to assist folks in not what's happened, but forecasting for the future. And if this affects your city, how do you deal with that? I can tell you that I kind of talked to my law enforcement brothers here, having that knowledge and information, it's the same on the fire side. If you have fire folks that are experienced, that go out and they get to practice the sets and reps in other locations, and then they bring that wealth of knowledge back to your home. So maybe it's not a campfire, maybe it's not an Eaton fire, maybe it's a smaller, not as destructive incident. They still have that knowledge, experience, and ability to manage that incident. And your chief officers are the ones that are going to go out, they're going to gather that information, that experience, and they're going to be able to pass it down in succession to your individuals. So I always strongly encourage organizations to get involved in the team world because they bring that home. And so whether it's managing something smaller scale, like a structure fire, or it's a hazardous materials, or it's a commercial alarm, plane crash, something happened at Disneyland, they're going to have the experience and sets and reps to where it's like, hey, it's not Orville Dam, so we're good, right? So strongly encourage our city partners to get behind and encourage our fire department people. Hey, we need more staff to be able to do this. If we dealt with this incident, what do we need to be able to mitigate this? What do we need to bring it back to state normalcy for the city and for the residents? All right, we see the finish line. So 9,100 homes searched, 1,100 miles as track. You saw the yellow line tracking. 69 targeted searches. That was, hey, I haven't talked to my grandma, my aunt, my uncle, my niece in so many days. 17 sets of human remains discovered. 7 days of USAR operations completed. Total personnel assigned to the search, that's 335. Anaheim, you guys have folks on USAR teams, correct? Thank you. Thank you for sending them out. 61 VIP tours and briefings, coordinated 860 folks from 86 cooperating organizations, repopulated 32,500 folks. 2,700 contacts with media, delivered 1.2 to viewers on social media platforms, and logistically supported the 4,000 firefighters, the guardsmen, the Triple Cs, and the LE folks were partners. We completed 18,381 damage inspection on the affected residents and commercial buildings. And we assisted public safety. We talked about building safety and assigning multiple engine strike teams to conduct red tag buildings. Stand corrected, 7,000 were completed in a 24-hour shift. This expedited the reentry and made safe for the repopulation piece. Big takeaway, communication, coordination, and collaboration was the key to providing the best outcome to a devastating incident. You took a Forest Service agency, you took a state CAL Fire Department, and you took all these local governments. Any agency, any city standing on its own cannot deal with the damage and destruction that occurred for 14,000 acres. It takes a cooperative, collaborative effort amongst all agencies to be able to communicate and get that job done, and that was the success of this incident. And that's the success on every major incident, is the coordination and communication amongst the fire partners and the cities to be able to take this thing down and be able to get it back to somewhat of a state of normalcy. And at the end of the day, we serve the public. And so we got to get them back in their homes and do the best that we can. There's your USAR teams. So with that, that's the end of my presentation, and I'll turn it back over to Chief Russell or any questions. Oh, I got a question in the front row. Go ahead.
I was taking some notes to give you guys some lessons learned or walk away from what we learned on those two incidents. As Dan said, we were in daily communication between the two incident command teams. It would seem one thing would happen at one incident, and we would immediately see that within the next 30 minutes at the other incident, whether that was a political inject or a concern or something that would come up that was a trouble or an issue that we had to deal with. So some of the things that we've learned from going through these sets and reps, as Dan referred to it, was participation from the city agency or the local agencies as you get into this, whether we're talking public works, utilities, the EOCs and all of that. The mindset going into those disaster incidents, throw out the 9 to 5. It's no longer the 9 to 5 city normal work week that you're accustomed to, and you need to prep your people coming into that for that. Like he said, nobody gets to go home on the weekends, even if it's Christmas, right? We need the presence. Not only do we need the presence from your agencies and your departments, but we need the decision makers. That is the biggest fault that we get into, and both of us had these issues on the fires where they were sending a representative, but it wasn't a person that could make the decision on when the road opened or when the power was going to be turned back on. They were simply there gathering intel and taking it back to their boss. And that becomes a problem when you're trying to repopulate 100,000 people, and now the decision maker wasn't there, and at the last minute you want to go open it, and they call timeout. Does that cause some political pressure? Are we all going to feel that pain at the end? Absolutely. So when you get into those situations or you have that disaster, we need the decision maker. As Dan said, we pretty much get all of our stuff for the incident command and the parts that we need your partnership presence at the ICP done by noon. But we need that decision maker engaged in those morning hours during those major incidents. And understand that, so when you're building your EOC, planning P, and your timelines, understand we need that participation and we need that high-level person from your utilities, your public works, and your EOCs engaged at that meeting. The cooperators meeting is that first part where you guys start to build those relationships between those different agencies. That's where we need somebody coming in and talking about what emergencies management's planning to do so everybody's hearing it. We need the utility representative there talking about what they're planning to do, the electeds and the city executive staff. That's your opportunity to engage. We put all of those on some kind of media platform, and that's where we need you to get engaged and involved in those meetings. And we'll establish, as Dan said, liaisons that are your point of contact so that you get all of that information in. for a law enforcement, he gave you the shameless plug. I can't tell you how valuable it is if you can get somebody within your organization on a team and the sets and reps that they will develop and come back, and if they've lived through these incidents, they're usually prepared for most anything because it's the process that we use and that training that it gives to them, and both for the fire agencies. The biggest pressure you're going to receive on these incidents is going to be that repopulation piece, and that's why we try and build that relationship, and we say that we need those decision makers in the room. The smoke clears or the disaster goes away and people want to know immediately why they can't get back into their house. But as he described, there's a ton of things, right? We have to go through the crime scene. Big thing that we're starting to see that a lot of agencies aren't recognizing that we really got an aha moment in the Palisades area on is the number of electric vehicles and battery walls. Now you have a huge hazmat component that comes into play, and how do we move that off-site? Can our guys go in there and work safely? Can we have somebody go in and turn the gas off, or do they have to be in full structure protectional equipment, right? So we have to work through those kind of pieces. That's another item that's really starting to come to light as we start to see that renewable energy piece used in the residential component. VOADs, get ready. You're gonna feel it, especially in an area like Anaheim where you have a high media and population presence. VOADs are going to be an incident within an incident on itself, and that's where the incident teams are going to need your help. I'll give you an example. We were just getting hammered, like Dan said. It looked like a swap meet outside of both of the incidents, and with about an hour's notice, I had one of my guys come up to me and said, hey, I have a truckload of 500 pounds of beef showing up at the incident. What do you want to do with it? I don't know, right? But that's where we're going to lean on that partnership and need that point of contact to figure out how can we take this. People are trying to help. We don't want to make them bad, but we need a place to offlift it, and that's where that relationship and having that point of contact into that incident management team is important. Media information, I'll give you a good example that you probably all witnessed. Everybody saw when Trump showed up at the Palisades incident. So a couple, 24 hours before that happened, the Environmental Protection Agency showed up at our incident command post, and they got into a conversation with one of our operational guys, and the term 18 months came up. Now, they were thinking long-term, 18 months, right? They're thinking what it was going to take them to get through the process. And this is where that media information and containing it and making sure we're all sharing the same message becomes important. So he came up to me, and it's that game of telephone, right? The information changes through time. And he goes, hey, it's going to take them 18 months. So that message goes out is it's going to take 18 months before we get people back into their houses. Instantly, I said, go find that guy and bring him to me, right? So he brought him over to me, and I got on the phone with their incident commander for the protection agency, and I said, explain to me what your role and your authority is. Are you able to keep people out of their houses for this length of time? And she's like, oh, no, hey, we're not doing any of that. No, our process from start to finish, we're estimating by the damage is going to take 18 months. Within 30 minutes, I killed the roomer inside the incident command post. The next day, it had gotten all the way up through the government agencies, and you heard the president come on and say, we're going to keep people out of their houses for 18 months. That's how quickly that information got out and changed and went around, even though we had killed it internally. The bad news spreads really fast, right? The good news doesn't get around quite as quick until we must mold that message. So from our electeds and from our PIO, making sure we are working together and coordinating our talking points so that the message we are delivering back to the public are seamless is extremely important, because those injects come from everywhere, whether we were talking about the death of bodies and all of that kind of stuff, making sure we work together and get that information out through a joint information center that is the correct information is invaluable and will save all of us a ton of headaches. The evacuations. So I'm sure all of you watched on the media the WIA messages, right? The wireless messages that went out. We had some issues with that, and these were lessons learned that I'm sure we're still working through. So the power went out, right? We sent out an emergency evacuation to remove part of Malibu, but then the power went out and it shut down the cell tower. Well, that message was still sitting in the cell tower. So what happened 5 days later when we reopened that tower and turned the power back on? The evacuation to evacuate sections of Malibu goes out, right? So those are the things where that we try and keep it consistent because we're not going to be able to control all of that. So that's where that messaging becomes extremely consistent, and going through and having practices with your EOC on everybody's participation and what their roles is invaluable. So when you get in these situations, you're not going to be able to control everything. But the more practiced you are, the more prepared you are, the more better off you will be to control and do like damage control during those things. So that's it, and I'll give it over back to Dan or Chief Russell.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. That was awesome. I know we're going to do a question and answer if we're getting to the end here. I want to just reiterate, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I know there's a lot of you here that have positions in our EOC or on our policy group, and you heard, I think it was pretty clear how important it is to have those lines of communication and have that be effective at the time we need it. Much like these fires, our fires in East Anaheim aren't overly large when you looked at that list. Canyon 2 is, in Anaheim was about 12,000 acres, so right around what Chief Olson was dealing with. A lot of the things we have, they might happen at a little bit smaller scale, but everything relative that they were talking about, we've either dealt with it on some of the fires we've had, or we easily could, depending on if we were the only fire in town or if we were the third fire to happen. So I think it's real important that we listen to those things and keep going. I'm very proud here in Anaheim. We do a great job with our partnerships with our departments, and that we need to keep fostering that. Everybody in here, I'm looking right at Shawnee with our care and shelter, that you've done amazing work when we've called that out and done that, and Dooku and Rudy and everyone else. So, but the importance of doing that, one key takeaway, and then I'll shut up, is when we get our fires in our East End, and that what we call the Devil's Triangle, where there's a lot of agencies affected out there. Fortunately, I want to talk real quickly. We have a very special thing here in Anaheim. We have a local to state agreement called a Wildland Protection Agreement with CAL FIRE. So when we get a fire out there, hopefully both of these gentlemen are going to come and stand right next to Bob and work the problem. That doesn't cover everything that's out there. One of our biggest target hazards in the wildland, Deer Canyon, is not in that wildland protection agreement. So any fire that happens in there, and there's no direct threat to the SRA, state responsibility area. So any fire in there is going to be on Anaheim. So any aircraft we order, any logistical supplies we order, any of that stuff is going to be on us. And that's why it's so important that we understand the system. Now they're going to come help, both these individuals, their resources, Orange County's resources, and other agencies, they're going to be coming through the mutual aid system. But when it comes to sit down and those checkbooks that we talked about, that's going to be a different story in certain areas of the city. So that's why I think it's important that we all understand. I know Debbie left because she probably knew I was going to talk about money. But that how this works. So again, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate you guys coming out. I would like to turn it over to a little question answer, and if some of my colleagues have questions, maybe we can get some of those answered.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the overview. It's very perspective. Manner, so it'd be interesting to hear any learned lessons about the number of shelters that had to be open. Were they overflowing? How many more need to be opened? Things along those lines.
The exact number off the top of my head, I don't have. I can tell you about the process that we utilize. Essentially, it's identifying in each local city area. So again, remember, we've got Sierra Madre, Arcadia, Pasadena, and a lot of those city organizations would take proactive measures in identifying a geographic area, be it high school that we're using a gymnasium. We utilize Red Cross to assist, so putting them up there. But in terms of right off the top of my head, I'm going to defer and kick to Lonnie and put him on the spot as well. But I don't have the exact number, but I can tell you at the incident commander level, I never heard of an issue where, hey, we're overflowing, we're getting inundated. One of the things that we do is we send our information officers there on a regular basis every single day, and they're able to pull those counts for us. And so that way we get an idea, because what we do is if they go to each of those specific shelters and say, hey, we have 600 here, we have 130 here, we're able to track that. And so at 3 o'clock that afternoon, if we do a repop of a geographic area and we see those numbers drop, then we know how many are living or is temporarily residing in our shelters. And then that also affects the numbers that we put on a document called a 209, where it's this one big binding document that essentially is a giant summary of what the incident's going on. I won't get too far in the weeds, but essentially that document goes against other 209s for other fires, and it kind of rates how prioritized the fire is within the state. And so we have to constantly demonstrate those numbers on the housing piece. Correct. Correct. Yep, and I'll let him speak on the Palisades piece because he may have those numbers.
I don't have the exact numbers. We embed a liaison in every EOC to make sure that we're coordinating, and it's more that timing piece and the communication, right? We want to be sending out one message, and because we're already holding a meeting, that's where we need you guys to come and speak at that meeting to what you're forward thinking and what the recovery piece looks like, so it lowers that anxiety of the public. So we want that from the jump, right? At that 10 o'clock meeting, we want to start announcing that we're already forward facing. The fire may still be burning, but we're already thinking about repopulation from day one. So that's the piece that we'll get into as far as, and that's where you would start to talk about the local care centers and LACs and that kind of thing. But as far as the numbers, we try and separate out as we're mitigating the incident, and the recovery piece goes over to our emergency management staff, and not get into their business and separate that out. We just want to have that seamless communication so that we can move and evolve from one piece to the other. That makes sense? Yeah.
I think one other piece that I didn't summarize, and it's the purpose of what that end state looks like, be it for a city, be it for a CAL FIRE unit, whatever the case. The whole premise of a team to come in is to manage that incident, so that way that organization, that fire department, that law enforcement can get back to doing the normal 911 dailies. Does that make sense? So I'm going to bring in a contingent or this giant team of 70 personnel. We're going to manage this incident for you, so that way you can get your folks back to answering the routine, the normal 911 calls. And then at the end of the day, when that incident is done, what is the product that we're turning over to you? What is manageable for you, right? So from a finance piece, we do a finance closeout. How much of this do we turn over to you? How much of that incident are you managing? How much of that care and feeding in the shelter piece, right? Hey, you can manage so many shelters, or you've got so many personnel to do that. So it's having that dialogue on that transition back to whatever entity it's gonna be, is what can you manage before we step away? We're there to provide the service and support to the city, to the agency, to the organization, whatever the case may be. And it's having that dialogue of what can you guys manage at your level so that we don't just leave you high and dry with a huge closeout or umpteen billion shelters that are still left over that are going to be unmanned, whatever the case may be. That's what the team's there for, service and support, and turning over that product the best we can.
So the other thing, when it comes to the recovery effort, and as Dan spoke, we'll come in with the incident management team to put the fire out, right, and deal with the mitigation of getting people back into their houses. But the recovery effort in these incidents, we actually left an incident management team that came in after we rotated out and went home. Our team 5 came in and helped out and assisted the emergency managers for both the city and the county, and basically helped organize some of the boots on the ground staff that were doing the mitigation work for the flood fight. So they were coming in and putting up all of the shoring and that kind of stuff. And they kind of organized the troops the same as we would a fire, and took that lift off of the emergency management piece so they could focus more on the overall oversight of the recovery piece. So there's that option.
Any other questions? Oh.
Type of
He's turning ill.
just kind of a general consumer of news and the updates and everything. I was just kind of curious when they were doing that. I can see how the normal reporting out of acres burned and containment percentage would make sense in a wildland fire. But as we go into these more urban interface areas, I can remember being just sort of frustrated with this, the reporting out, again, just sort of your KTLA morning news, where we've got this amount of containment, we've got this many acres burned, but you could never really get a sense of like, are there neighborhoods being impacted? Where should, those kinds of things. So I was just kind of curious in terms of your thoughts, in terms of better ways to communicate, it reminded me sort of like the COVID numbers that would keep coming out. You would just hear the same thing over and over every day about 3,000, people, and it lost all context for kind of where the incidents were at, how they were actually affecting people. So I'm just kind of curious in terms of communications, what maybe, is there any thinking in the industry about how better ways to kind of describe incidents rather than kind of those two statistics that we kind of just keep hearing seemingly on repeat, but don't really give any context for what's the impact on the ground?
You want it? They've been hearing me for an hour and a half. So.
No, exactly what you talked about was one of the ones that we were really focused on. So Dan talked about the success that they had during the damage inspection process and trying to get people back into the areas, right? And we heard that, right? We started to notice the drop-off in people's interest. Fire stopped burning, and we keep telling you the same containment, and it hasn't moved, right? That part of it is done, but it was that interior work. So one of the things that we worked out on our team is some talking points and moving that message. The message has to evolve, right? First, it starts as the fire's growing. Everybody wants to hear that, what's happening, a little bit about how many houses are burning, but we don't have the accurate numbers. And then it evolves into, okay, the fire stopped, what's next? Now you want to know, is my house still standing, right? That becomes the next big question. Then after that, immediately followed by, when can I go back to my house? And that piece is a key message that we're trying to craft so that we evolve with that message of, and the success that they had. I think you're going to start to see that methodology of operation used throughout our teams, because he created an efficiency on their incident we hadn't seen before. To do what they did in the amount of time they did, we immediately picked up the phone and called them and said, tell us, please, what in the heck did you just do and how did you pull that off so fast? Because we hadn't seen it move that fast. They found a new way to do something, but as you're talking about is the information piece and getting that message out. What we're looking at doing is the aerial flight will give us those initial structures damaged. Then we're going to have boots on the ground that are just moving through really quick and probably looking at the houses and just doing a real quick count. What we had before is we'd use the aerial flight, but we'd have to tell everybody, hey, it's not accurate. I think the aerial flight for the Palisades was about 1,000 structures off because of what he said, right? Mobile homes, all the different stuff that it doesn't pick up. So we're gonna start assigning fire staff to actually go through and get that information because we know how important it is. And then we'll follow it up with a more forensic DINS process, which is necessary for their homeowner's insurance, as well as if you look at all the community risk reduction that you're doing in fuel stuff, that's what they're also looking at. They're going out and looking at where that work was done. And did we lose those houses? Or is what we're doing as a fire service actually benefiting the community? And that's where we're gathering that data. So we need the forensic piece. We're just learning that that isn't moving at the speed and scale of the appetite of the information needed. But to that point, that's exactly what we're looking at doing. And then providing that data in real time instead of 48 to 96 hours later.
All right, just to follow up on that, I live in the neighborhood that was impacted by the fire, and so it was fascinating to be, as part of my role here in Anaheim, to be in EOCs and to be part of a command and go through the operation from the government perspective, and then now to be a resident that was impacted by the fire. And I could talk all day about my observations, and I've shared with my colleagues here. But on the communications piece, I think that was, Ted hit on it, and it's crazy because my experience, again, from both sides of it, I'm kind of still troubled by, how we do things from a government perspective, but how actually things worked on the ground. And I feel like we're, from a communication standpoint, we have an antiquated system of communications during emergencies. But I know it's built that way for a reason, right? We can't just throw information out there every 5 minutes. The one thing that was most helpful to me, because we were evacuated first, the first few hours of the incident, is I got every government app on my phone. I was tied into the city's, social media, CAL FIRE's social media, everybody's social media. The only place that I got real information that was actually helpful and up to date, minute by minute, was the Ring Camera neighborhood group. And I never used it prior to this incident, never. Things would pop up, oh, there's a pack of coyotes running down Martello, blah, 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 blah. And I just ignore. During the fire, every minute there was somebody on there saying, I live at this address. The fire is still 2 blocks away. We're staying. People next to me evacuated. And I was on that app. I eventually left at about 10 o'clock on that first night. And from 10 till daylight, I was on that Ring app getting updates from people who had stayed behind, saying the structure is burning to the right of me, but everyone to the left is okay. And it was a game changer. And I don't know, I've tried to think about how government can participate in that. I don't know how they can. I don't know if they would want to, because we don't want people to be there. We don't want people encouraging folks to come back and help save your home and this and that. But I tell everybody, it was basically crowdsourcing information in real time, and it totally helps. I mean, again, at 5 o'clock in the morning, as soon as the sun came up, I was told, again, on the Ring camera, that 3 houses were burning on my street. My house was safe. Get your ass over here. And so I went to my home and got the fire brigade with my neighbors, and we put out those homes on our street, and then we kind of tried to save our homes. And so, but without that kind of information, I would been totally in the dark. And so my head's still spinning on how to use that information or what the future of this looks like. But I think, Ted, I think you hit on it too. It's a lot different than like a rural fire where we're talking about acreage. We're talking block by block, home by home, and people want to know, okay, am I safe or not? And then it continued well after the fire. So, for instance, it shifted to who's got power? I got power. I don't have power. This block has power. I just heard that the crews are at this home. That means they're dropping a pole tomorrow. You should have power the next day. And it was incredible, the information and the amount of sharing and the crowdsourcing of information. So again, I don't know what to do with that from a government perspective. I don't even know if we want to play in that pool, to be perfectly honest. There's all kinds of pitfalls with that. On the other hand, it was incredibly helpful, and it was the one source of information that I got the entire time. I stopped watching news conferences. The city, I'm city of Pasadena, but I'm on the border with Altadena. I stopped looking at their social media because it was all just kind of antiquated, outdated. It was hours and hours behind. Anyway, that was my feedback.
Yeah, if you figure out how to keep up, you let us know. That was one of the challenges of the teams, right? I make a joke in my day job. A lot of us have WhatsApp. How many people know what WhatsApp is, right? I get updates from WhatsApp before I get updates from my BCs that are on that incident managing the command and control piece, because you have so many people that are involved in the social media piece, in the applications piece, in that internet piece. And that is the challenge that we face as a team, is keeping up when you have 35,000 residents that have this platform to be able to communicate on, right? And I have one PIO that's right here, and then maybe 40 that are out in the field, and the reflex time that it takes to get that information in. That's for viable information, right? And so that's the problem that we face also in the world for us, is the bad information, because we end up chasing down just as much bad information and having to right or steer that ship because someone gets on there and says something that's maybe politically driven or whatever the case may be, and all of a sudden that narrative changed, right? And now you've got essentially an audience of 35,000 people that are hanging on every word, and now someone just put some bad information out, and now that PIO I got to go to and say, hey, you need to fix this, right? City government's coming saying, hey, you guys need to fix this. And so that is the challenge that we are all facing, regardless of what your function is. In city government and public safety is chasing down, and how do we get ahead of that? And we've been trying to figure that piece out. We've done incident portals and information and Do we bring on more people? How does that work? But you cannot compete in today's day and age with social media as quick as it goes out. It's hard to get in front of that. So what we did do, at least on the state teams, is we added an additional position, and that person manages the incident portal, and so those provide those updates. So one of the challenges we've always faced is we hold a press conference, right? And we get up there, and Dan Olson's there, and he says, this fire is 10,783 acres. 5 minutes later, my intel airship flies over, and they shoot it, and they tab it until acres burned. It's 12,000 acres. It's like, dang it. Right? And so there's just those constant updates. And for us, we usually wouldn't, historically in the past, we wouldn't be able to update that until we put out a deliverable, be it a press release, be it a fact sheet, whatever the case may be. Now we have an individual that their sole responsibility is they manage that incident portal, and they provide those updates, and then they get on those platforms and be able to update. So if you have that person working with your city government and saying, hey, we just got this update, and boom, we're blasting for effect. In the government realm, it's just making sure that all those entities responsible for the delivering of information are on the same page, and we get that as rapid as we can. You on social media, right? As a resident, as a bystander, whatever the case, when you're in these positions of authority, and again, regardless of whatever job we possess in this room, we have to do a trust but verify, right? Because it's the agency that we represent, be it on our shoulder or a patch, whatever the case may be, we are speaking on behalf of those agencies. If I am speaking on behalf of the city of Anaheim, I better make sure that that information is validated. Whereas if I'm a resident and, hey, McDonald's burned down, and then you're getting, right? Like, you can fire away all you want. But there's that trust but validate. And so with that, we need to make sure that the information that we provide is accurate. But there's also a challenge of using finite numbers, and that's the piece that I try to educate folks on as we move through. And in the PIO realm, it's called gray speak. If I go out there and on the first day I'm going, yep, that aerial surveillance said it's 10,793 houses that were burned. And then all of a sudden I need to walk that back by 5,000. Are they going to eat my lunch for dinner? Yeah, right? So that becomes a challenge. So we need to trust but verify some of those numbers. And so sometimes we try to educate folks on, hey, over 10,000 homes were potentially burned. As we get ground truthing and assessment on those, we'll be able to get you those factual numbers. But we kept dealing with that with some of our agencies as far as that finite number. They wanted to give that finite number every day at a press conference. And we're like, hey, you're going to paint yourself in a corner. And it did. And then the media started eating that, right? And then the smoke started going away. And then now they were looking for that next narrative because the containment isn't changing and the acreage isn't changing. And essentially on that incident, it ramps up and then we hit that plateau for a couple minutes. And then we start that glide path, and that's where your acreage stays the same and your containment goes up. But in the media world, what's that next story? And so that's where they start focusing potentially on, hey, well, you said this, but now this person's saying that. And so it's to keep that story going, right? And so those are some of the challenges that we face in these positions of authority or in city government is sometimes that narrative has a time to go skew when the smoke clears. So.
Thank you. In terms of the success, you said kind of lessons learned on the speed at which you did the inspections. How much was that the cross-training and using the engine teams versus the database tool that you had? And if it was the database tool that you used, is that something that you have at CAL FIRE that you just pulled down, or was that something you quickly procured and built for the event?
So building and safety, right? So I'm assuming you're not talking so much about the damage inspection component as you are maybe the red tagging of the buildings. So LA County building and safety, and I forget what the gentleman's name was, I'd say, yep, reach out to so-and-so. But essentially what we did is they gave and I wasn't there, so I'm trying to gray speak it right now. is essentially they provided that information and assessment as far as the rules of engagement and then sent those folks out. I know that they broke it up into branches and that's the way we achieved it, but I don't have the exact details as far as, is there a platform or a program that LA County Building and Safety utilized to capture that information, or if we used, much like we did the SARCOP, where we said, okay, they went from here to here to here to here, and they captured that. Unfortunately, I don't have that information. The search and rescue piece. And so SARCOP is a traditional program that's used in the SAR and the LE piece when they conduct those. The DINS program has their own complete different program, very similar to SARCOP. It's a tracking right of breadcrumbs that says we went here, and we did this. So it's a very similar platform, but I don't know if either one of those were used with regards to the red tagging of buildings.
They use Crisis Track to document that, which is tied into WebEOC. That way they can document the red tags and they can, oh, sorry, I'm yelling backwards, sorry. They use there's Crisis Track as an app that allows you to assign blocks or areas where they can then go through and take pictures, upload them, the damage, and that's what calculates it. So no, we do not have it, but I have the vendors, I have the salesperson's name. So that's the option that they used. It seemed to be really good.
Any other questions before we wrap this up? All right, with that, I'll turn it back over to Chief Russell. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lonnie. I appreciate you guys again coming out, and I appreciate all of you being here, your questions, and your attentive to challenges we may have here in Anaheim and how we will accomplish those. So thank you very much. Have a good day.